Welcome, everybody. My name is Lou Brown, and I manage the Forum for Scholars and Publics at the Franklin Humanities Institute. And it's my great pleasure to welcome back to the Forum, although we're in a new space from where Steve, the first time I did something with you was on Zoom, actually. So this is, I think, our first time to be able to do something in person. Stephen Hayes and Javier Wallace to talk about their project, Reclaiming the Current. I'm just going to do some brief introductions of them, and then the conversation will be them explaining what their project is all about. So Stephen Hayes grew up in Durham, right here, with his older brother Spence and his mother Lender, who were pivotal in shaping and sparking his creative approach. When he was in first grade, he broke a remote control car. His brother took it apart and attached the motor to a battery, bringing it back to life. Amazed, Stephen began breaking all kinds of things to see how they worked and what he could create with the pieces. By second grade, his mother had given him a real workbench. She and Hayes' brother would also bring home abandoned equipment for tinkering. Working with his hands took many forms, and by high school, he learned to crochet. Now, here he is, a graduate of North Carolina Central University. He earned a Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture at Savannah College of Art and Design in Atlanta. His thesis exhibition, Cash Crop, has been traveling and exhibiting for more than a decade now. In his work, Stephen uses three symbols, a pawn, a corn, and a horse, to explore America's use or misuse of Black bodies, Black minds, and Black labor. Artists, he believes, are as much translators as they are creators. He started teaching at the college level in 2011. Currently, he is the Esben Shade Assistant Professor of the Practice in Art, Art History, and Visual Studies here at Duke University. Javier Wallace is the Race and Sport Postdoctoral Associate in the Program in Education at Duke University. He completed his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. Javier is a scholar, speaker, and founder, working to uncover and amplify the undertold stories of Black athletes and immigrants and Black people across the Americas. His recent book, Basketball Trafficking: Stolen Black Panamanian Dreams, exposes the global pipeline that moves young athletes across borders and into exploitative systems. He's spoken on these issues and others, from TEDx stages to national classrooms, and was featured in the Sport Emmy-nominated Vice docuseries Scam Dunk. He co-produced and co-directed CB, Power to the Player, the film about Duke's first Black basketball player, Dr. Claudius C.B. Claiborne. Javier is the founder of Black Austin Tours, where he's built one of the most visible cultural storytelling brands in the region, bringing history, place, and narrative together for tens of thousands of guests. Javier brings his history and verbal and other types of storytelling skills together with Stephen's skills with art and sculpture and envisioning different pasts and different futures to this project called Reclaiming the Current. So thank you for coming, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Lou, for the great introduction. Thank you all for being here this evening. We are elated to share this project with you all here this evening. We are an intimate audience, but that is totally fine. That gives us a chance to continue to be intellectually curious and engaging as needed this evening. So we definitely are excited to share with you a bit more about the project, and also field any questions that you may have and engage in dialogue with you all who are here. So again, thank you for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure for me to work alongside Professor Stephen Hayes in the work that he's done. And I'm just so happy that we connected on this project. I mean, my first time laying eyes on this sculpture was actually in Dakar, Senegal, where we just happened to meet. I was there for a basketball tournament that was being put on by Basketball Africa League, and Stephen was there finishing up a residency at Black Rock, Senegal. And I forgot who, I think it was Martin, might have told us that we were in the same place at the same time, in Dakar, Senegal, of all places. And that was a real formative trip for me. And then we really started to develop a relationship from there. And we're kind of looking at one of the projects that we've collaborated on so far. And so I would say that to you all. Thank you for being here. And I'll definitely kick it off to Stephen so he can give his welcome and talk a little bit more about how the project began, because he iterated a lot of this at the beginning of the stages.
Yes. First of all, thank you, Lou. Thank you, Professor Wallace or Dr. Wallace, and thank you all for being here. Um, like Dr. Wallace said, we met in Senegal, and that's why I was doing a residency at Black Rock, which is a part of Javier Wallace's residency, where they pick 15 people around the world to come there for a certain amount of time. So while I was there, I was either trying to learn about the diaspora and trying to see how the people in Africa, the artists there work and what kind of materials that they use and everything. And during that month while I was there, I decided I wanted to cast a bust of people that live there in Africa or in Senegal. But what started me on this journey was this image, this work right here. This is my MFA thesis show called Cash Crop. And it explored the transporting of people from Africa to America. It's an estimate 15 million people were transported, so I made 15 statues. So that was my journey, not knowing about the transporting of people, not learning that history in school. So for my thesis, I made 15 statues. I casted the people. I love to use people in my work, so like their human body. So these are all castings of people who live today. So this piece was made 15 years ago. It's been traveling since 2010. What drew me to making Cash Crop was seeing this image, the Brooks slave ship plan, which is the image that depicts how they put the people on the ships and how they shipped them here or on that 6 to 8 week journey to different locations. I'm just gonna show y'all a few images of Cash Crop. This one is at EJI, Equal Justice Initiative Museum. They commissioned me to reproduce this sculpture to go on their sculpture garden in Montgomery, Alabama. So this is in bronze and steel. The original was in cement, steel, and wood. So during my time in Senegal, my goal was to, well, I decided to make my goal to cast the bust of a young lady. And I wanted to submerge it in the ocean and leave it there for a year. You know, I didn't really have all the ideas worked out in the beginning, but my goal was to leave it in the ocean and to allow the ocean to change it and see how the cement was going to react to the ocean within that year's time. So in that time, you know, with these images, this is how the bus originally looked, but this is it now. That's on the right hand, well, your left is me scouting out the spot where I was going to put it at in the ocean. So I was right on the shore where it was low tide. And I walked about as far as I possibly could on those rocks to submerge it in the water. This is me submerging it in the water as far as I could go out on the rocks. And I took a lot of photos as I went out there to put it in the water so I could remember how to get there. Basically, I left myself a map to figure out how to get there, like looking at each rock along the way.
That's important to the story, y'all. We'll come back to that later.
So I took photos of each rock as I walked away or as I went to the scope 2 where this head was submerged. A year later, this is what it looked like when I pulled it out. You can consider this to be like a bio art like thing. And then ended up while in Senegal, this is where Javier came into play. That year later, I told him about the opening that was happening in Senegal, and we ended up meeting up with each other. And knowing or learning about what Javier does with his day in practice and his work, it was, in my eyes, it was a no-brainer for me to talk to him and to work with him. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but before I got on the plane trip back to the States, I sent him a long thing about my goal and that I was interested in working with him about this project, Reclaiming the Currents, and that I wanted to go to as many ports of the diaspora as possible and cast 2 busts at each port. And allow them to stay in that ocean, in that water, or the waterways for a year to allow the ocean to change it, because we were transported by the water. I know somebody's probably gonna ask, but the numbers on the bottom of the pedestal are increments of time that it was in the water. Each bus will have its own pedestal dedicated to the location in which is submerged. So, yes, sir.
Sorry. You said, is that minutes in
So-
the ocean or?
Minutes, seconds, days, weeks, so
Oh, it's all different.
it's all different on each side, yes.
I see.
But we're gonna transition to,
Yeah, no, you good, man. I'll come in and share a little bit of how my involvement in the project went. And so, as Stephen mentioned, as fate would have it, we were on the same flight coming back to New York in Senegal. We didn't know we were there, but we were on the same flight coming back that evening when he sent me over everything. And so, Lou, in my introduction, talked about a lot of my sport work, which is 100% true. I'm dedicated to thinking about sport and particularly trafficking that happens in high school basketball with Black youth, and more particular from the global South, and how to mitigate some of those issues. But I never disconnected from my broader interests, which are always thinking about movement of people as well too. And sport is a way of movement. And so if you do have a chance to read my book, when I talk about Panama, I talk about the migrations of individuals in Panama that are Black. And so you have a migration of people that are descendants of African people who were trafficked to Panama by the hands of the Europeans from the 1500s, and they are the conduits to move more people across the isthmus, which ends up becoming one of the longest routes, as we know it, of the transatlantic slave journeys, right? Because the Panamanian isthmus is so thin, why we have the Panama Canal, which facilitated the migration of people from the Caribbean coast of the country, or the isthmus at that time, to the Pacific coast of the country, which then made people set sail to the Pacific coast of South America. So if you ever go to South America's Pacific Rim, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, the largest concentration of Black folks in that area are along the coast, because Panama's largest market in South America was Peru, of selling African people. And you know, Peru doesn't have a Caribbean coast. It's not directly tied to the Atlantic Ocean, but it's a part of our Atlantic world, mainly through the Isthmus of Panama and that history. And so I talked a lot in my book about that migration of Black people, but then also how the migration of Black people in Panama became further complicated when you have people like my ancestors, primarily on my father's side, who mostly freely migrated in the 19th century to the Isthmus of Panama to labor in around some of these large North American-inspired imperial projects. The one mostly that many people know is the Panama Canal, and the U.S. iteration of the Panama Canal from 1904 to 1914, where hundreds of thousands of primarily people from the British-controlled colonies in the West Indies migrate to Panama and labor in these projects, also the banana plantations as well too, more so in the upper lands of the country near Costa Rica. So I've long thought about migration, and my mom is from Texas, a descendant of enslaved people forcefully trafficked into Mexico that become African-American, and my father's from the Republic of Panama. But along the route, I co-founded Afro-Latino Travel in Panama, which is a tour company, educational tourism company that is dedicated to telling these stories to people. And then when I go back to Texas to start my PhD, I start Black Austin Tours, which in that space is dedicated to telling the histories and experiences of contributions of Black folks in Texas. And so I've never given up the sport work, but I've always been deeply rooted in public storytelling around different aspects of Black history and culture. And so that enabled us to come together and think about how can we combine forces and push this into the world in a way that makes sense. And so we come to, by virtue of all that I just explained, and I mentioned that the Panama Canal, it attracted individuals from the British controlled West Indian colonies, not the only places, but in their majority. That's where people came from. My great-grandmother came to Panama with her father from Barbados in the early part of the 1900s. She was born in Barbados, but she came with her father, William Fitzgerald Braffett, and he passed away during the construction of the canal, and she remained in Panama and had family in Barbados. Many Panamanians like myself have that extended heritage that extends beyond these different countries because of these migratory routes. And so because of that, I had relationships with people in Barbados. And Barbados is not a big place. If you know, it's over 200,000 people. It's not even, Durham, North Carolina is bigger in population than Barbados is as a country. And so when Stephen brought this idea of him wanting to go to different places, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time because some of my friends who are family members in Barbados happened to be working for the Division of Culture, which is from the Prime Minister's office, and they were looking for a memorialization project because they have been disrupting the type of memorials that they currently have in their republic. We know the Caribbean is not a perfect place. We know that the vestiges of colonialism still linger in that space. But in this particular instance, with having a Black president and a Black prime minister who have created what they call the Road Project, Reclaiming Our Atlantic Destiny, one part of that aspect of that project, they have public memorializations where they are challenging the colonial traditional monuments that have long existed in the colony now country, since it's one of the newest republics in the world, of how can they now challenge that? You know, they had Lord Admiral Nelson, like you have in Trafalgar Square in London, that was in the middle of Bridgetown. And it came to a question, as we saw in the United States in 2020, people in Barbados were also asking, why do we have this here? We're a country that is 90+% Black people, descendants of enslaved people. Why do we have Lord Admiral Nelson in the middle of our country, in our capital city, in front of Parliament? And so if you've been to Bridgetown, you know that has come down. And they now have a new monument there that talks about the national heroes. And so they wanted to continue doing this memorial, and they will continue doing this memorialization project to disrupt the colonial statues and monuments that they have, and not only honoring people that are well known. A big aspect of this are also community members that have made tremendous contributions. And one person that they really wanted to honor was Cuffy. King Cuffy was leading one of the first known intended rebellions in the British Atlantic world. In 1675, the plan was to rebel against the colonists that held them in bondage in Barbados. And as the story has been passed on on both sides of the spectrum, both from white colonial officials and their reporting and Black people that have retained this information, is that they intended on June 12th to overthrow the British colonial regime at that time and install a guy named Cuffy, an older African who they said emerged from the Akan people. And they were going to install him as the King of Barbados and push back against the enslavement system. And so with that, they wanted to do a project where Cuffy could be a public memorial and they could tell that story that they have been telling, but publicly, in an official way, memorialize him. And we brought the project Reclaiming the Current directly to the Minister of Culture, Dr. Chantel Moreau-Knight, and she immediately loved the idea. She thought it would be a good way not only to tell the story, to put up a public memorialization project, but also to engage youth of the community, to help them educate themselves about individuals in Barbados that are not tied. Well, they are tied to that history of colonialism, but in a public way. And so what you'll see now quickly is the insertion of one of the two busts that goes into the water off the coast of Spicetown, Barbados. And Spicetown is an important part of that history. Spicetown is known as Little Bristol. If anybody knows the history of Bristol, England, and the trafficking of individuals, Spicetown, Barbados holds a lot of history in relation to the larger British Atlantic world. And we can go into more of those histories in a minute, but I just want us to have that context. And now this is a short video of when one of the two one of the bus enters into the water in the Atlantic Ocean.
So our goal is to go to each port, and at each port to cast 2 busts. So one will stay in that location, and the other one will travel back to the States. The goal is for at each port that we go to. So say there's about 175 different ports around the world. Say we do 20, we'll have about 40 busts total submerged in the water for a year. The goal is to bring back one and the pedestal and have a large exhibition or show that could talk about the diaspora and everything, and also create a book talking about each port. So we want to learn the history and work with historians and people in those communities so we can create information or a book for each port.
I do want to also just give you, this is a photo of it going into the water off the coast of Spicetown, Barbados. One of the 2 sculptures, accompanied by some of the dignitaries that were there. The gentleman in the top left-hand corner, you'll see him in a bit. He is the person who sat for the molding to be representative of Cuffy. And so as we know from the history of Cuffy, he wasn't, as it was told, he was an older gentleman. And so it was very intentional to locate somebody who was an older gentleman. And this gentleman was there. And then also it was important that the persons be from St. Peter's Parish. If you're anybody familiar with the geography or the landscape of Barbados, Spicetown sits in St. Peter's Parish. St. Peter's Parish is the known location of where the intended rebellion was to happen. It's important to say that the rebellion did not happen, but there were plenty of repercussions that were noted. If I'm not mistaken, near 100 African people were executed as a result of this intended rebellion. I only say intended because it didn't make it to come into full fruition, but the plan was there, and a lot of people faced the lethal consequence of losing their lives for protecting their integrity and their humanities and doing whatever it would take to ensure that they would have access to their humanity. And so it was intentional to have people of that parish to be there in that site and to engage people from the community. And so it was a great program because young people from the community came out, as you can see here. They not only participated in the molding, I have some pictures here for you to see Stephen working with the hands, and he can talk a little bit more about why hands were important to this project. And we'll replicate this on June 12th of 2026. And so the Division of Culture in Barbados, again, will have another ceremony to bring the bus out of the water, paying homage to King Cuffy and those who lost their lives on that day, on June 12, 1675. And that is a part of Barbados' emancipation season, which runs from April until August. August is a culminating month of emancipation season in the British Atlantic world and now the Caribbean, because that's the day that marks the end of slavery in the British Atlantic world, which is August 1. And so that's Emancipation Day. And so this falls within Emancipation season, which includes, if anybody knows Barbados, you might know rum and crop over. Anybody know crop over? It was crop over. Crop over is a part of the emancipation season. So crop over, for those who don't know, is a highly celebrated event right now that is similar to what you might understand as Caribbean Carnival with feathers and those things, but it's deeply rooted in a history tied to the lives of enslaved people, in the cycle in which they worked according to the products that they were forcefully being made to cultivate, and how they implemented their own cultural traditions in there. Now it is a huge event. It is a very commercialized event, and it falls within emancipation season in Barbados. And so they welcome many people from the community to have a drumming ceremony to welcome these individuals into the water, as I myself share that belief that it was important not to just drop the things in the water, but to make sure that we were doing it rooted in a tradition that is very close to us as people and descendants of African people, where we know water has long held a very strong role in our spiritual and everyday lives to do that. And so that, and then Stephen can talk way more about this because he was the one, I helped now. Don't get it wrong. I helped. I pulled the plaster apart. I was dusty at the end, but he did all the work. And so you see the two gentlemen, Mr. Frank and Mr. Bradford, they were the ones who set for the two molds, both of them from St. Peter's, and Stephen and I there. And there's a couple more photos Stephen can talk about the process in Barbados, and there's one with the kids and in the hands as well too.
The funny thing you said was that you helped.
I did.
He helped verbally. It was a verbal help.
I talk good now. Don't get it wrong. I might not build anything, but I'm gonna talk us around it though. So yeah, they said I like to talk. Okay, that's fine.
No, but yes, he helped a lot. What you see here is me casting the bust, casting the role of the man who then posed as Kofi. What I do is I use life as a casting. My subjects, they sit down, they sit still. I lather them with Vaseline, and then I place plaster gauze over their skin. There's no straws or anything attached. Their nostrils will be open so they can breathe. It's about a 45-minute process, give or take, probably a little bit less. But where I place the mold over his skin, he sits still, and it starts to cure. So I'll do two halves. I'll do a front half and I'll do a back half all at the same time. So while he's sitting still, he can't do anything, just sit there and think. After a while, I give him a series of things to do. I tell him to smile. I tell him to flare his nose. I tell him to raise his eyebrows. That helps release the mold from his skin. After that, I pull the mold off like a shell, and I put it back together. After it's put back together, I'll go back and pour it with cement. My goal is to use cement for each port because that's an easy and easier material to get a hold of in those locations. A lot of these ports or places, cement is abundance. So I use cement for the sculpture. After the cement cures, I add an agent to it to make cement cure a little faster. So it probably takes about 9 to 10 hours for that cement to cure, and then I go back and clean up and do cleanup on all the sculptures. So yeah, he sat there, and I placed the stuff on his skin. The next thing was to use the youth. Our goal is to inspire the next generation. If it's not for us, we want to be able to inspire the next generation to continue telling this story. We're at a point where, the history that we're working on, or our history in general, is being erased. And these stories are not being told or not want to be told. So my personal goal is to continue telling this story, because if I don't do it, nobody else will in my eyes. But we're able to cast these kids' hands, so at each port, depending on how many people were transported in those locations, we're going to create some kind of mathematical equation to cast different pairs of hands from kids and place those hands in the ocean as well and leave them there. And they'll be pointing in the direction of Africa as a way of saying thank you. So these are the hands that we casted. I think it was 6 pairs or 6 pairs of hands. For the Barbados process, this is a unique situation where we are adding the hands to the bust, which will be placed in the ocean, as a way of saying thank you to Kofi for his sacrifice.
Yeah, and I think it's now I didn't help with this process. I was there the whole time, but it's not easy having those little kids sit in those molds. I think we did it. We didn't. It didn't happen the first time around. We were like, oh, do we have enough material? Because they were moving so much. What did we did it twice?
We did it one of them about 2 or 3 times because she just wanted to talk and not stay still. But we got it done.
I think the material is moving. No, you are moving. The material is you. But that was a great experience to work with those young people and bring them in. What we're doing in collaboration with the Barbados. On the Barbados iteration, you can see the people taking photos in the background. The idea there is to turn this into parts that can be added to the curriculum of the young people in Barbados to learn more about Cuffy and that history there as well too. And so, next slide, please. Yes, as Stephen mentioned, very happy that Barbados agreed to work with us on this level, and we were able to collaborate, especially with that institution, the Division of Culture, which believed in this idea and wanted to be the first official place to launch Reclaiming the Current project. So what you're looking at now, this is a map courtesy of slavevoyages.org. If you've never been on that website, I highly encourage you to go on the website. It's part of a consortium that was put together by a couple different institutions that brings together data from around the world in voyages of enslaved people that are known. And we definitely know that there are data that is not included in this database, but within that database, they've done some real cool things, and you can toggle with it. You can create interactive maps where you can isolate the country, the ethnic group of origin, the particular landing point, the point of disembarkation. It will give you the number of Africans that were picked up, stop 1, stop 2, how many arrive at the final destination alive, how many perish along the way. It gives you more information. It breaks it down. How many kids? Because they took data for those that they believe were kids. They took data points on that, and they enumerated how many people along each vessel were children. Because as Stephen mentioned, the inspiration for a lot of his works comes from the Brooke ship. And the Brooke ship was used by Lloyd's Insurance in England to help figure out how they would go about insuring vessels that were carrying people. And so that document is a working document that you see when you see those people laying down, which is on Stephen's shirt. That's a working document that Lloyd's used to think about how they would insure those ships. And so a lot of these, to many people's surprise, was a highly enumerated and statistically taken endeavor. Now, maybe we don't have the names of these individuals. In some cases with this data set, particularly those that were captured at sea and liberated, they do have their names there that were at least transcribed by the person that received them. So it's a cool data set, and that leads me to say a big portion of what we want to do is also the data part of it, is to include this digital component of it with making an interactive map that not only tells the data that we can pull from places like slavevoyages.org, but we can also tell a broader story like what we're doing in Barbados, where it involves the youth of the community, where now it becomes a digital product, if you will, because the documentary is coming out that the Barbadians are doing to use alongside. And so we know that the ports and the places are many, It's not only on the Atlantic or Pacific or the Indian Ocean. We've had conversations with places here in the United States that also are interested on rivers, right? The rivers are many, especially here in the United States, when we start talking about the domestic slave trade in the United States, the second Middle Passage. I mean, so many people were transported along rivers here. Memphis, Tennessee was the in largest port of disembarkation inland. But that was only made available because of the Mississippi River. It was easier to sell people along that way. New Orleans, the Alabama River, when we talk about Montgomery, Alabama, and the incident that happened there, and people were talking about how the Alabama River holds a history as well, too, of people being trafficked, and that is true. We just came from Richmond, Virginia this weekend with students from here, the James River. Richmond is an inland port that flows along the James River that exits into the Atlantic Ocean. And so it's not just oceans that hold these stories. There's also currents that exist in other waterways. We've been in conversation with the International Slavery Museum in Liverpool, England. A cool history fact here, if you know about Liverpool, you would know that Liverpool was responsible for not only manufacturing the majority of vessels that transport people from British ships that transport people between Africa and the Americas. It's also the largest receiving port of cotton from the United States. It's estimated that near 80% of cotton produced by enslaved people in the United States went to the port of Liverpool to fund the British textile economy. And so the only international maritime museum dedicated to slavery in the world is in Liverpool, England. It's undergoing a 90 million pound renovation. And we've been in conversation with them to see how it is that we can collaborate with them. There's so many places that we endeavor to go. Our big goal now and challenge is connecting with places, with institutions, and people that can help forward this project along, that are willing to collaborate with us in their communities to tell a story about these individuals, about the current, and how we can reclaim it and put it all together. And so that's what we really want to do. I'll give Stephen the final words before giving you all a QR code so you can sign up for our email list if that makes sense, so you can hear more updates. And then we can definitely open it up to Q&A for questions that you all may have.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna open it up to questions and answers, but reclaiming the current, we are trying to reclaim the current, all the history that was lost and never found or never recovered. So our goal is to travel to these ports and understanding of the history of these people who were trafficked in these different locations. So I would like to open up the floor if you all have any questions for us. We can continue. Yes, sir.
And let me know if that QR code doesn't work. Okay, good.
Oh, thank you.
So I would like to know a little bit more about the actual installation. You're putting it in the water. How do you do that? Are you installing something to make sure it doesn't move? And how were in these hands from the children? You say were they on the bus or nearby the bus? I'm kind of interested in more details about how you did it.
Okay. So you see here, the hands are on this pedestal, on the base. If you look there, submerged from the base. So this sculpture itself is about 2 foot wide. The base is about 2 foot wide, so it's a heavy base, and this one is not going to move. The one that I will bring back to the States is more like this one. So we had to make a smaller base that would keep it weighed down. So we worked with the guard. The guard, the Coast Guard.
The Coast Guard, the Barbadian Coast Guard.
We worked with the Barbadian Coast Guard to find a location, a great location to put it where it's not going to harm the sea life, but they know it will stay and no ships will go by and hit it.
Yeah, it's a pretty calm area. of the Atlantic Ocean, it's in the bay. And so that was the Coastal Guard is the name of that. The Coastal Guards did the environmental study to figure out where would be the best place, what level of weights would be necessary to make sure that it wouldn't move. And they did that. Right now, there are buoys. There are buoys around the site right now that say King Cuffy Memorial Project. Again, just trying to make sure that a vessel that's coming in knows that something is beneath and it won't run over. There's people that are doing some cool scuba diving, or not scuba diving, it's not that deep, but cool snorkeling. We have some, I don't have the video up here, but there's some cool videos of people doing snorkeling down there to see, which is, I think, pretty neat. And it challenges, let me say this, I have to say this. So this is the first underwater installation in the history of Barbados. Now, a lot of people believe that there is a submerged sculpture dedicated to enslaved people in the world. And if you heard that, you might think Grenada. There is a sculpture in Grenada that is underneath the water, and people have made the meaning to be dedicated to enslaved people. However, if you go on to the website of the artist clearly states in the description of the work that his intent was never to make this about enslaved people. He recognizes that many people have taken the meaning of it as being related to slavery, but that was never his intent. That's important to say because some people have asked us about this project in relation to the one in Grenada, and then it's important for us to say that no, to our knowledge, this might be, not that we want to be the first, but it might be the first underwater sculpture intentionally dedicated without any confusion, without any misinterpretations to enslaved people of African descent in the Atlantic world. But yes, it was intentionally placed in the water with heavy weighted things, and the area is protected to prevent, we just have to hope no bad hurricanes come now in November, June through November. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Is there a way?
I think they want the mic because they're recording.
Is there a way to visit the site in Barbados now before you bring it back up? Can you visit this place? Yes.
Yes, like I mentioned, it's buoyed. There's a buoys there that say it. I can put you in contact with Tony. He owns the company that does the water sports, and there's another company that are taking people to go dive. It's 25 feet. That's all it is. I say that like I'm going down there. It's 25 feet below sea level, and yes, you can go see it if you desire, but it will be up by June, so you need to go before June.
I'm going at the end of March.
Okay, we should talk so I can give you that information. Steven said he'll go down there.
I will.
I
will.
Stephen, can you talk a little bit about the preservation of these busts but particularly after your exhibitions? It's cement. I don't know how well that's preserved over time. I'm just interested in that.
So, this is a very big, large bio sculpture, right? Or a project that's going to happen. So I don't know how the environment is going to change this while it's underwater. And once it's out of water, I can't predict how it's going to change out of the water. My intent is to have the world or the environment change this work, because I'm still thinking about how we as people change the world and how the world has changed us in general as the trafficking of people and our bodies to these different locations. So the cement, it will last. It's going to last on the water. It'll strengthen over time because it's cement, and it's going to stay there for a while. And these aren't huge sculptures, so it's not going to crack as much. But I want life and things to grow on it, so I can show this change, this natural change, these organisms that are growing on this thing. And we're just thinking about how, people who were moved to Barbados to farm these lands. Barbados is, what was it, a slave colony or
Slave society.
a slave society. So, this is one of the biggest slave society that was there, and how they were there to cultivate that land. So just thinking about how we changed the land, and now I'm trying to, from what reclaiming the currents, I'm trying to show how the water is changing us and the relationship of lost information from people, as far as like our history from Africa. So I don't know, how it's going to change. This has been out of the water for about 4 years now, so, or 3.5 years. So it's still here.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions.
Tell us maybe who you are. If you
My name is Robert Wallace. I'm a graduate student going back to school at age of 69. And I also write for Duke Chronicle, so that's why I'm asking a lot of questions. I'm struck, if you will, by the appearance. I think about Greek sculpture. And we have learned through history now that they were not white. They were painted. And I look at this, and I mean, you can have all kinds of meanings from it just by, and I know that's what you want. But I'm curious what your thoughts are, and the fact that it's been out for 4 years and it's changing. What does it say to you as an artist? How it looks to you, and how you think it may look to the world.
Okay. Very, very good question. When it first came out of the water, it had so many amazing colors. It had these purples and these pinks and browns and stuff on it. And it evolved after that life kind of died off of it to this, what you see now. My goal as an artist or myself is to spark the next generation or spark the next person to want to learn this history or to want to push forward these certain histories. So, and also my second and first goal is to stop my audience, in their tracks, to come closer to the sculpture to understand what it is. So if I could stop the person with the first visual, I think my job is done, because then they're going to want to learn and understand this and probably even research this history. So I'm here to spark that next generation. As far as how I see this work, this right here was the starting point for me to come up with the idea of reclaiming the currents. So I see this as a lifetime job that I'm working on now. Like, this is my life's journey now for me, for all intents and purposes. Like, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to go travel to these different worlds, these different places, and learn this history of trafficking people from one place to another, the diaspora, and learn how or what they did on this land. And use that as a way of not only creating a book, but creating something that's going to continue telling my history. Like I said before, my history is being erased. And if it's not for me to be able to tell and teach my history, who else is going to do it? For so long, our history has been told through the eyes of the oppressor. And I want to create artwork that's going to show the history through the eyes of the oppressed. I want to talk for my people and be the voice for my history.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting, and I want to know, lots of things. But do you have plans to do this in any place in North Carolina, any of the slave ports in North Carolina? And I have a second question too. And I wonder how, I mean, in the map you showed, so much of the Middle Passage took place out in the deep waters of the Atlantic, and I'm wondering if you thought about moving any of this or trying to do any of these farther out from shore, farther out from the ports, in the deeper waters.
So, second question, yes. We will most likely have to work with the Coast Guard, depending on what location we're working at. And we will love, whoever we collaborate with, we are welcome and open to going to those different locations and submerging them. First question was
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Yes. I am currently working with I'm currently working with an artist named David Wilson on a project called After the Carolinas, where the city of Raleigh received a grant from Z. Smith Reynolds to create a sculpture called After the Carolinas, where they went to Africa and in a location in Africa, and they were saying, so how are you all talking about the history of, the transporting people in Africa, from Africa to Carolinas? So then they contacted me and David to be able to create a sculpture, which will be unveiled sometime in June of this year as well. So yes, I am working on a project it's outside of Whiteville, North Carolina, Brunswick Town, I believe. So we will be having a sculpture unveiled there. And hopefully I will be able to submerge some sculptures around the waterways of North Carolina. I think there's about 4 ports. So my goal is to possibly go to these 4 ports as well and submerge those heads in there, but I need to connect with those communities. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that one of the bus is going to stay at the port where you're submerged, and one's going to come back to the United States. Where and
So,
where will we see all of them?
so the goal, Barbados was our first iteration, right? The one sculpture you see with the hands is going to stay there in Barbados. They are creating a public art area for this sculpture to go and stay there. So it's going to be out in the open, So I don't know how the sunlight and all that stuff is going to play against the sculpture that's going to be pulled out of the water. But the one that we bring back, we are still working on the places that it's going to go, the locations that it will go to, because this is the first iteration, and our goal is to go to more locations to get more busts in order. So, like I said before, this is going to be a life journey for us, because it's going to stay in the ocean for a year at each location. This is the first year, maybe this year or later on this year, me and Dr. Wallace will go to a different location, maybe put and place busts in there, then we have to wait another year to pull them out. So we're still in the works of where it's going to go. So we have to collect as many as possible.
Are you connected? Are you familiar with the Charleston African American Museum?
Yes, sir. The Charleston African American Museum, they know me. I just unveiled a memorial in Charleston, a few blocks away, for ancient burial ground, African burial ground, where Charleston is known for mass graves, and they don't have any markers. And I was contacted by a Spoleto Festival to create a marker for those mass graves, and I ended up creating a memorial. So they found 36 bodies in this mass grave, where they was in 2013, where they was building the Gilliard Performing Arts Center. And they collected the DNA samples, so they know about how old each person is and where they came from. And they contacted me about 3 years ago.
That's great.
Asked to make a memorial. So I ended up making a memorial where I casted hands from people around the same age range and same lineage. And they're all coming out of a bowl. I created a fountain. Each hand has come out of the bowl. I had them go to different had them go to different burial grounds, mass graves in Charleston and collect the soil and put the soil inside of the base. So they mix the soil with the cement to make the base of the fountain. And there's 36 spouts coming out. We just unveiled that December of this year, December, I think, 14th of this past year.
And the reason I asked is that museum seems to want to look, sort of do its programming through a lens of the diaspora.
Yes.
And so it feels like your work and their mission come together.
Yes, sir. I've met with the director and everything, so hopefully one day we will reconnect and create something there as well.
I just want to add to that question that yes, this is something, I mean, it literally, I mean, with as many places and sites that people have been moved along water, like it literally is a lifetime level of work. In addition to that lifetime level of work, what we have discussed is not having to do one bust a year, but to find multiple places that can have these busts submerged, and eventually, with the ones that will travel, host an exhibition at different institutions of learning, museums where it can be curated there. And so, yes, that is our idea, is to connect with institutions and communities to see if we can accelerate the speed at where we can submerge these busts and tell these stories. So yes, we can travel, because the idea is that these busts will travel, and each time it travels, it tells the story of these different places and how they're interconnected. So of course, we start with Barbados, as we did here today, with the story that community wanted to tell through the bust, which was Cuffy, 1675. Like, that's the story they wanted to tell. And so the idea is, when this collection comes together, when it goes to the next place, the story of Cuffy is the story that community wanted to share, but where it's still interconnected through the water to the other place. And if it's in South Carolina and they want to talk about how the Carolinas have been remade and more earth was moved to facilitate the production of rice than there are in some pyramids, that might be the story they want to tell. They want to tell a story about Gullah Geechee. That might be the story they want to tell. And so hopefully those places we'll be able to tell those stories collectively at these exhibitions or exhibits when they're. So that's why we really have this urgency to try to connect with different folks and institutions and communities to see, can we come and work with them to create this work so we can move it around.
So if you know people
That's
want,
that's really
who want to be part of this amazing project, reach out to Stephen and Javier, reach out to me. I can send messages along. I can find them. But this is important work, and it's sometimes at Duke, when we talk about community engaged work, we don't always think about the global side of things, and we certainly don't think about the way art and history and literature and all the other ways that we work with communities. So from that perspective, I'm also really grateful that you've created this wonderful example of how to do that in a collaborative way too, and not an extractive way. So thank you very much. And thanks everybody. There's still some food left out there, so help yourselves. But yeah, let's have a round.